It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. We have a special show for you today about Brexit. That's right. Brexit is the term coined for the UK's recent decision to exit the European Union. And today I'm going to talk with three guests about the ramifications of Brexit in both the near term and the long term for business in general and sales in particular. You'll hear views about the uncertain future and the strategies sellers should be pursuing now to win new business. My guests are not political commentators, but sales, marketing, and business experts, but they're also individuals with very definite opinions about the pros and cons of Brexit. So first off, I'll be talking with Tim Hughes. Tim is the UK-based founder and partner of Digital Leadership Associates, a social digital transformation agency. He is one of the leading experts globally on social selling and the author of a great new book titled Social Selling: Techniques to Influence Buyers and Changemakers. Tim was previously on Accelerate in episode 157, titled The 5 Pillars of Social Selling to Re-Energize Your Pipeline. After Tim, I'll be talking with Régis Lemmens. Régis is the Brussels-based founder of Sales Cubes, a consulting firm which helps sales organizations to innovate and co-create value with their customers. He is also a professor in sales and sales management, teaching at business schools in Belgium, the Netherlands, and in the UK. Régis was also previously on Accelerate in episode 76, titled The Future of B2B Sales and the Changing Role of Sales Reps. Finally, I'll be talking with Bob Apollo. Bob is the UK-based founder of Inflection Point Strategy Partners, and he is an expert on the subject of value-based selling for the complex B2B sale. Be sure to check out my previous conversation with Bob in episode 66 of Accelerate, titled How to Simplify and Shorten Sales Cycles with Value-Based Selling. First up now, Tim Hughes. All right, joining me now is Tim Hughes. Tim is a social selling expert based in the UK. He's just published a great new book coming out called Social Selling: Techniques to Influence Buyers and Changemakers. And he's recently founded his own new company called Digital Leadership Associates, a social digital transformation agency. Wow, that's a mouthful there, Tim.
It is, Andy, yes. It's really exciting times, what with the book coming out and starting an agency. We see there's a real gap in the market in terms of real practitioners giving large B2B organizations practical help about moving towards digital and social.
All right.
And that's what we're about.
Excellent. Well, we're going to come back and talk to you another time. I know about your book, and we'll get into your new company. But today the topic is Brexit. You know, we can't escape the news about the UK voting to exit the EU. And it seems like to me that's going to start creating some complications over time, if not more immediately, for businesses trying to sell product into the EU from UK and vice versa, from the EU back into the UK. So what do you see as some of the short-term implications, practical short-term implications for business as a result of this?
So far, what I'm seeing is uncertainty. And I think while while we don't have a prime minister, that uncertainty will probably carry on. But and what we're hoping for is that leadership election will be over very, very quickly, and immediately people can actually start showing some leadership. But there again, what you've seen is that George Osborne, the Chancellor, has already put out a plan from a fiscal point of view, in the fact that he's basically cut corporation tax. And so he's cut it to 20%. So in the EU, he can only cut it down to 15% because of EU rules. Mm-hmm. And this is a classic example of where people are telling us about how we run our country. So, you know, what better way to tell people that we're open for business and for big companies and for individuals to come to our great country, which is to show that we actually have an environment for businesses, or a low taxation environment for businesses to work in. And that's really what we're doing in terms of going out to the market, or what George is doing is going out to the market and saying that the UK is open for business.
And so in terms of
we're going to have this new economic environment in Europe where there's going to be new, trade relationships existing between the UK and the EU, and potential tariffs in place that currently don't exist. It seems like that's going to take us back to an age, perhaps, where even more emphasis being placed on being able to sell value of what you're selling, because you might have a loss of your cost competitive advantage.
Well, interesting point. I mean, there will be discussions required around trade, but if you look at before the election, we were being told that the Germans don't want to talk to us, and of course now we've actually agreed to go to Brexit. They're saying, how quickly can you get around the table? We're the biggest buyers in Europe of German cars, VWs, Mercedes, and BMWs. And they want to get around and talk to us about how they can keep importing them. The same as we were told before the election. Obama came over and said that we'd be back at the queue. All of a sudden, we're now at the front of the queue. The UK's always been a great trading nation. We speak the language of commerce in terms of English. And everybody is all of a sudden now queuing up, wanting to have these trade relationships. So, from a B2B sales perspective, I mean, I'm hearing of deals and where they're being shelved, but I kind of feel that maybe there wasn't really a business case in the first place, and people are kind of using this as an excuse. The reason for Brexit is that we as a country can actually then define how that we actually trade and how that we do business. And if as we're already doing is cutting the corporation tax, we can become a country where everybody wants to trade, and that will bring people in. That will bring companies in. That will bring people from all different countries that can add value into the country, and it will create wealth. And I think it's isn't it Kennedy saying that when the tide comes in, all the boats rise, and that's a thing where people want to come to this country. There's a certain amount of uncertainty, but once we get that uncertainty, people will still want to come. For example, when the French put their income tax rate up to 60%, we now have 700,000 French people in London because people don't want to pay 60% tax. They want to come to a place which is thriving and with a cultural centre, but they don't want to pay. You don't have to pay 60 cents for every dollar that you earn.
Or be limited to 35-hour work weeks.
Yeah, or be limited. Yeah. And one of the problems that you get in a lot of European countries is that it's so difficult to get rid of people that you don't take people on. So there's a lot of people English people who work in Paris, but they're on English contracts. And that's one of the ways that the French people get around that. Gartner do that, for example. They have high unemployment, especially amongst youths. And the only way that they can get around that is to have contracted staff. And so, what we have in the UK is a flexible workforce that can kind of move where you need it to go. And as long as we keep investing in education and keep the skills going, then we've got a great place to go back to where we were, or kind of build that platform that where everybody wants to do business with us.
So what you're saying is Brexit then actually is a net positive, because in the long run it creates a more competitive UK, not just in Europe but worldwide.
Yeah, the whole point of Brexit is to create an entrepreneurial country, a country where people want to come and trade, and people want to come and work, and people want to place their businesses in their HQs. I mean, you've seen, before the vote, there was a whole number of financial services organizations that said, "Oh yeah, we're going to go to Frankfurt or Paris,"
right?
And they've all turned around and said, "Well, actually, we didn't really mean that, and we're not going to do that." And the reason why, HSBC and, there's two financial services hubs in the world. There's New York and there's London.
Right.
And the reason why they're there is because that you've got a whole talent pool that you can tap into. And the way that you attract those people is you bring them to cities that are vibrant and thriving, that people want to work in.
Well, it's part of the as you said, you have the whole ecosystem and infrastructure there. I mean, it's not too dissimilar from saying, look, we're going to rip Silicon Valley out of Silicon Valley, right? I mean, there's all these other low tax states in the United States that have lower tax rates than California, but they're unable to attract sizable numbers of businesses because the infrastructure and the ecosystem is there that help these startups thrive and survive.
Yes, and Frankfurt is important, but it's from it's a fraction in size to London. And anybody who's been to London, and I invite anybody who's listening to it to come out to London. If you walk around the city, you will feel the energy just as much as you do if you walk around some places in New York. It kind of flows in the air. You can kind of just feel it. Mm-hmm. And we're able to make decisions about how we're going to run things, and that will create wealth for everybody. And Brexit, there's been a number of debates about good or bad Brexit. It's kind of to use the terminology right now. This is our disruption. And we've been through a disruption like this before, where some people don't like it, some people liked it, but so if you take the 70s, the country was generally run by the trade unions. We had strikes, all the time. We were on the 3-day week. We had power cuts because of strikes. And what happened was that Margaret Thatcher came along and said no more. And we went through a number of years of quite difficult pain, but when we came out the other side, most people would say the society that we have today is better than the society that we had in the 70s.
Right.
And what we're going to see with Brexit, probably much quicker, the fact that George Osborne has immediately made some changes to the corporation tax, is that what you'll see is that the UK will become a low tax place that people will want to come and work, and companies will want to come and work. And very, very quickly, all this thing about the uncertainty of that will go away, and people will go, yeah, we should have done this years ago.
Yeah, so it's sort of interesting. I think that, you're talking about the UK becoming a low tax haven, where, 30 years ago, it's all the talk about the celebrities that were fleeing as tax idols from the UK, living in Monaco.
We had 80% tax. We had the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and they all went to live in France and America because there was the Chancellor, Dennis Healey at the time, did a quote that he was going to squeeze people to the pip squeaked. And that's what happened. The tax of 80-90%. And we ended up getting down to 50 and now 40% tax. And there's no reason why we can't actually bring the tax rate down even further.
So from a very practical implication, it sounds like the short-term implications for people selling product from the UK into EU, possibly into North America, is some uncertainty about what the impact of the Brexit could be. So there could be some short-term decision delays, decision cycles stretching out. But
yes, yeah, and I think what people need to do is probably sit down and actually identify the sources of uncertainty. The magnitude and the duration. Looking at certain things, like the political process, the financial economy, trade, and if you take currencies always go up and down. But the fact that we've gone from $1.6 to the pound to 1.3, there's been quite a move. Now it will always move back, but if people are doing certain business, then they need to take that into account. That there may be some currency fluctuations.
Which actually could be beneficial for the UK sellers in some case, right?
Well, actually, yes. So if you take the fact that the pound's gone down, actually that means our goods and services are cheaper.
That's exactly right.
Which is actually good for the UK and good for for the products that we produce. It's not good for us if we want to go to Europe on holiday or the States on holiday, because the currency we buys us less. But the fact that the currency has gone down ultimately should be good for us, and it will bounce back. And what we're also seeing is that American companies see some of the tech companies in the UK now as being cheaper than what they were. And I'm sure that there'll be a certain amount of mergers and acquisitions, some M&A through that. But what people can do is that they can actually build what I would call an uncertainty map. So look at the things like the political process, the economy, the trade, attach a value to it, and then build an uncertainty map where they can work out certain scenarios and a risk plan. But I don't think that the Brexit issue is going to be. It's not going to be years. It's going to be short until they press the button, which is called Article 50. Which is as soon as they invoke Article 50, they're given 2 years to basically come out of the European Union.
And do you think there's a chance that it gets reversed at all? I mean, it seems like there's this groundswell of support in the UK among certain sectors to try to reverse it.
Well, the vote was 52% to 48%, and before the election, to get out of the European Union, generally you were looking at about 55%, 60% of approval for that. As we went towards the election, it came down to it was a 52-48. So, we work on the first past the post process here for democracy. So the majority wins. So the majority voted for Brexit. Now, I think what happened running up to the election was that neither side explained the political process. And I think that once people understand the fact that this is Brexit could be good for the country, what will happen is that you'll find that the minority of people, the 48%, that position probably softening.
Okay. Well, good. So let's just sort of summarize then, is that some short-term uncertainty from your perspective, short-term uncertainty, companies put together, as you said, an uncertainty map or sort of a risk map, if you will, that says, look, we may need to tweak how we're actually selling in the short term in terms of how we pitch our value proposition and so on, because there is this uncertainty. But if you have a great business case that you develop for a product or service, then you still should be able to close those deals. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And the business case and working with the client to build that business case is critical.
Excellent. Well, Tim, thanks very much for joining me today, and we'll look forward to talking to you again shortly.
Thank you, Andy.
Next, I'll be speaking with Régis Lemmens. Now, welcoming to the show, Régis Lemmens. And Régis, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Hi, Andy.
So
nice to have me.
Yeah. So, gosh, there's been, I can't escape the news about what's been happening in the UK and Brexit and so on. So it seems like that could create some complications for sales professionals, both on the continent and in the EU as well as in the UK. So what do you see as some of the practical short-term implications for business with Brexit?
Well, on the short term, this has created a lot of uncertainty. So we don't actually really know what Brexit will mean. Everybody over here didn't expect it to happen. Even in Britain, they didn't expect it to happen.
No, they didn't.
I just happen to have my neighbor is in the Parliament, in the EU Parliament, and so I have some inside information thanks to him. And he basically told me, he says, whenever there's an election, we usually have a plan A and a plan B. And he says, I can guarantee you there was no plan B here. They never believed in the UK that the vote was going to go this way. So they had absolutely no communication plan whatsoever to manage it. So it's a surprise, and I think it's a surprise for everyone. And I think, whenever in business we don't like surprises.
No.
Surprises, basically, it's the same thing as uncertainty. So it creates a lot of uncertainty at the moment.
So the uncertainty into the short term, especially as it affects sales professionals, is that people are going to sort of lengthen out their decision cycles. If they were evaluating new products or services, maybe they're going to sort of sit a while and see what happens.
Well, it depends on the industry. And I was this afternoon, I was in the banking industry, and I can tell you in the banking industry, they're definitely holding out on some decisions because they don't know what's going to happen. The UK, London being a hub in terms of finance,
Right.
what's going to happen there, nobody knows.
Well, there seemed to be a lot of talk about, 10, 15, 20,000 jobs relocating from London to Frankfurt or Brussels or somewhere, but it seems like they've been backtracking from that.
Well, they're backtracking also a bit because there seems to be also a lot of talks we hear about, backtracking from the whole Brexit idea that they might have another referendum, or that the parliament still has to ratify the referendum. So there might still happen a lot of things. So again, nobody really knows. Basically, what remains is uncertainty. And in sales, as soon as you have uncertainty, everything takes a long time to decide.
So, you work with a lot of different companies, as you mentioned, different industries. From a sales perspective, what are you advising them to do sort of here in the short term? And then let's talk at the long-term perspective.
We basically advised them. There was this afternoon as well, we're having a discussion, and the conclusion we reached is, let's just ignore it.
Interesting.
Because we don't know. And either we stop everything, we don't do anything anymore, or we just ignore, and we hope that in the end things will work out one way or the other. And so let's just continue business as it was and see what happens. And that seems to be basically the general idea that most businesses go about now, because there's just nobody knows. It could go any way.
Well, and it seems to me that it really puts a premium on something that you and I spoke about in the interview when you were on Accelerate back several months ago, which was this idea of co-creation of value and really focusing on selling the value, helping the customer uncover the value of what you're selling, what the benefits will be for them in the long term. It seems like this puts even more of a premium on that right now, because if there's uncertainty, the way you sort of work through the uncertainty is you make the business case even more compelling.
Yeah, that's true. Let's focus on. Yeah, I agree with you. That would be my first impulse as well. Focus on the short term. At least we know the Brexit is not going to be any reality for the next 2 years. So whatever we can focus on the short term, we can do business on. Having said that, there's quite a lot of instability in terms of the overall markets. Interests are low everywhere. The stock markets are pretty high everywhere. So question is about is there a correction coming? What's going to happen? And predictions are here now. We had the discussion with the bank this afternoon, and we said, let's look at the long term now. Let's focus more on things that we know are stable, businesses that we know are stable, and let's focus on the longer term and not on the short term, because on the short term, we don't really know what's happening at the moment.
So where are those areas of stability that you're seeing, at least in the European economy?
Well, at first, it was the banking industry, believe it or not. Because it was the thing is banking industry, and also the producers, the Procters and Gambles, the big brands,
the consumer products. Yeah, right.
Yes, they've been there for years. They'll be there tomorrow as well.
People need to always buy diapers.
Yeah. A bit. Focus on things we know. Focus on stability, the long term. Whatever's going to happen in the short term, it will correct itself, and we'll end up okay. And banks were also something which, the financial industry in Europe at least, has been greatly undervalued because of the financial crisis. So there's been a lot of talk about, perhaps that could be an area where there's still a lot of growth, possible. But then again, you have the Brexit and all the finances being in London. So it's a discussion. It's a discussion at the moment. Should we focus on the finance industry? Is there a lot of business to have possibilities there for Europe or not?
Well, I would think that corporations looking at making investments in infrastructure and making the operations more productive and so on, given the low interest rate environment, still seems like, again, a fairly compelling argument to go forward in most cases before that changes.
Yes, no, it's true. And I can just speak, being based out of Belgium, at this stage, we see records high in terms of loans. There's a huge amount of loans that banks are providing to corporations. So there's a lot of investment happening at the moment. So although you say Brexit, you say a lot of instability, But if we look at the fundamentals, we do see a lot of businesses are just investing. A lot of people are also believing that the Brexit, in the end, will not be such a terrible thing, that it's mainly a political debate rather than an economical debate. So that somehow, in the end, people will wake up like after a hangover and will say, "Oh, we did a mistake, and let's correct it." And that's what we expect, basically.
Yeah, it seems like that could be one of the logical outcomes, given that the UK was maintained their own currency throughout this, the EU membership in the EU anyway.
Yeah, they've never been much of a European partner anyway. Let's be perfectly honest.
Yeah. So, what implications do you see? Let's say Brexit does sort of move forward, and I know this is pure speculation and projection, but in terms of selling from the UK into the EU, does that become more difficult for UK-based companies? And so what do they need to be thinking about as they plan what the future could hold?
In theory, yes, because we're going to see import tariffs happening again. In practice, to be quite honest, I don't think anybody believes that will happen. Everybody believes even if the Brexit will go ahead, there will be some kind of deal that will be made somewhere down the line, because remember, we still have 2 years, and there will be a deal, and we will do business together.
I mean, the tariff barriers won't be as high or as formidable as they were before.
No. And if they might happen, they will happen mainly out of a political, retaliation that afterwards will go away anyway.
So much ado about nothing, perhaps.
Well, yes and no. Yes and no, because what we do see, and that is something that is worrying in Europe, is that the Brexit is just between the UK and Europe, but we do see more popular movement like we had in the UK, also popping up in other countries. So
more of the nationalist movements.
Yeah. There's a general sentiment in Europe of, is this the way we should move forward? And that is something that is worrying.
So
it's not just the Brexit
integration versus disintegration.
Yeah. I think the Brexit is a symptom of a bigger problem, a problem of the EU. And we talk about selling. Here's something which we've not done well. The EU hasn't been selling itself well to its constituents.
That's interesting.
And I think
how so? Where have they fallen down?
I think it's becoming something which has become something we don't understand anymore. We tend to believe something we understand. We know from the science of persuasion, if your customers understand something that you're selling, it gains into credibility. I don't think we understand how the EU works anymore. It's becoming so big and so complicated that we disconnect from it. But however, what we do understand is our daily lives and the problems we've got. We tend to say, well, we've got these problems. The EU is not solving it. We don't really understand what the EU is doing and what the EU means for me. And you know how it is, like, the saying, failure has no father and success has many. I think it's a bit this,
Right.
We blame, and that's the Brexit as well. The English are blaming everything on the foreigners and on the EU, and that's why things are not going well enough. And that's an oversimplification, but because the EU hasn't been good in selling itself to its constituents, that's what we're left with.
Well, I think, very, very similar in the U.S. I mean, you talk about, the anti-big government political movement. You could say that's really based on a failure of government to really demonstrate the value that they're providing to the constituents.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you must have the same thing in the U.S. as well.
Oh, yeah. We're in the midst of an election season, as I'm sure you're as aware as we are, as painfully aware as we are. And, we're not without, the nationalist fervor and sentiment, infiltrating our campaigns as well.
Yeah. So I think that's the biggest danger we've got in Europe at the moment. And that creates uncertainty. And we know that uncertainty is never really good.
So does part of that then say, gosh, as companies, we need to spend more of our time than looking at, export markets like North America, like Asia, that perhaps have less uncertainty associated with them, at least if you're selling into the U.S. or China?
There was a big talk about the emerging markets. Should we focus more on the emerging markets and doing business there and see what's happening here? Because there's also not so much growth in Europe. So if you're looking for growth, and perhaps stability that was associated with Europe is now less and less associated with Europe. Yeah, could be.
Interesting. Well, good. Well, Régis, thank you for taking a few minutes out of your evening to talk with us.
Oh, it was a pleasure, really.
Well, good. Well, thanks again. We'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you very much, Andy.
And my final guest of the day, Bob Apollo. Okay, now I'm joined by Bob Apollo. Bob, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Andy, and I hope you are.
Doing quite well. Thank you very much. So, we can't escape the news in the last couple weeks, really, and actually some weeks leading up to that about Brexit, about the news about the UK voting to exit the EU. And wanted to take some minute and talk to some experts about what this could mean for sales professionals, for business in the UK, in the EU, as for North Americans selling to those as well. So what do you see as sort of the practical short-term implications for business and sales from Brexit?
Well, Andy, I'll tell you, I think the news came as a pretty profound shock to most technology-based businesses in the UK. And there's no doubt that there's now a certain amount of uncertainty about the way in which the British economy will evolve, at least in the short term. That's not to say that, once all of this has panned out, years of negotiations and so on, the UK economy may find itself in a different and maybe equally competitive place. But it's no doubt injected a lot of uncertainty into investment decisions.
And do you see some of the uncertainty in your own business right now?
Well, it's interesting. I haven't seen any immediate impact on, for example, the number of potential clients that I find myself talking to. What I do see is, though, that they're becoming particularly concerned about really making sure that they execute impeccably in their sales cycle. And this is not merely their ability to compete against the obvious competition. I think there's an awareness that they're going to be competing against no decision. Now, this is not something that's radically new, but in the current climate, it does appear that their customers are going to be more cautious in terms of their investment decisions. They may delay decisions if the problem is not urgent.
Interesting. So, yeah, because I sort of see that one of the implications is, it's interesting you bring that up about no decision in the short term, because I see that puts more of a premium on really understanding the value proposition you're selling, being more effective selling the value, and certainly something that you focus on in your work. And I see that sort of continuing on, assuming Brexit proceeds apace, as I sort of talked about, in the next 2 years, all the relationships are renegotiated, trade relationships are renegotiated. And if there's some additional tariffs put in place, it seems like the mastering your business case becomes even more essential.
I think that's absolutely right. It really only reinforces a trend that I think we've both observed. The vital importance of having a really effective and compelling value proposition that isn't just a generic value proposition, but is really adapted and tailored to what you've learned, is particularly important to each individual client. So those skills, those well-developed selling skills of tailoring a value proposition to each prospect's individual priorities, I think are just going to be so important. And they will distinguish the more effective salespeople and sales organizations from the less effective ones.
Yeah, well, I think especially, you enter into let's say a tariff environment where suddenly your product is, or just given the change in currency exchange rates, is your product is suddenly 15% more expensive than it was before.
Well,
you still have to make a case.
You do, and it's very hard to predict what the outcome will be with regard to are tariffs going to be imposed. I think it depends on whether our friends in the European Union wish to punish us for our impertinence as something to dissuade other countries from doing it, or whether they want to they choose to take a pragmatic approach to negotiations, whereby we don't want really either party's economy to suffer in the long term. What harms us will actually harm Europe. We'll see. It's unpredictable at the moment what attitude negotiators will take. But I will tell you that the impact of the currency movement, which happened almost immediately, is certainly putting a squeeze on organizations who directly translate, dollar or euro into sterling. And I think it's going to be hard to justify to a prospect why you need to increase your prices for, most of my clients are software vendors. What is, after all, an intangible good? It's really almost all the value effectively is in the original intellectual property.
Yeah, I mean, and given the way the margins are typically set up, I mean, it's not like there isn't some flexibility.
So we'll see, and I suspect that salespeople will find that they need to draw upon some of that flexibility, but they also need to be making, and this is something we've touched on before, haven't we? Really compelling business case driven by true value.
Right, and I think for hiring managers and people bringing on new sales reps or bringing, recruiting reps into your company is the focus on people with specialized knowledge that can make that case, as opposed to hiring the generalist that you want to invest significant amount of time bringing along. I think it shifts the balance more to hiring the specialists than the generalists.
Well, I think there are a number of shifts in recruitment going on. One of the significant ones that I've observed, talking to the chief executives that I've been working with, is an acknowledgement that pure experience, if it's not complemented by the right attitude, the flexibility, the curiosity that is characteristic of a top salesperson, you need to look for, both experience, maybe a specialized knowledge, but certainly the adaptability, the agility, the attitude that's going to help you shape what may need to be increasingly flexible and creative business cases.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I was sort of contrasting that versus sort of the stereotypical, hey, I need to hire a closer, a hunter, aggressive. You talked about the curious, the learner, and you combine that. That's a different skill set, a different mindset, and a different candidate than most companies, quite frankly, are looking for. So in this environment, as we're talking about, with the uncertainty coming, you're better off preparing yourself with those type of people, is what I'm hearing you say.
I think you need adaptable people who are still really driven by a personal learning curve, who have not concluded that they know it all, or that they've discovered, a winning formula. So all they have to do is repeat it. I think increasingly recruiters are recognizing that the development of their salespeople isn't just a matter of choosing the right training or workshops or what have you. I think you need to recruit people and encourage salespeople to have that personal development agenda as well.
And so for managers looking at potential channel strategies, let's say UK-based sales managers or looking into the EU or actually even North American sales managers looking at channels into the UK and EU, it seems like perhaps now is the time, too, for them to look more for partnerships, perhaps, and developing partners in the countries. Because, I don't know, in the past, before the EU came into being and I was selling in Europe as a North American vendor, we oftentimes had to have partners, right? Because just the developed preferences for local vendors. Do you see that sort of coming back to the fore?
Yeah, I'm not sure it ever completely went away. But again, particularly if you're in a complex sales environment, if your offering is a considered purchase rather than a guaranteed sale.
Just break that down, what you mean with the difference between a considered purchase versus a guaranteed sale.
Well, so, a guaranteed sale might represent things like, raw materials for a factory or consumables, where it's inevitable that an organization will have to buy them. The only question is from who.
Okay, I got it.
Considered purchases, on the other hand, are investments that at the end of the day, you don't absolutely have to make. You could continue to run your business, albeit, the salesperson would argue less efficiently, but you could continue to run your business by sticking with the status quo. So considered purchases in one way affect the status quo, that impact, that cause the status quo to be challenged.
Right. And so your point about those, again, taking a step back then, the differences might be impact different on one or the other. So you're saying considered purchases are ones that may take a little bit longer, might be a little more problematic in terms of decision cycles and so on.
Yeah, Andy, the difference between, essential purchases and automatic purchases and considered purchases. In a considered purchase environment, customer could just stick with the status quo. They need to be persuaded of the need for change as well as of the need for your solution. And the sales skills that we've just been discussing end up being particularly important, particularly critical in successfully selling into those considered purchase environments.
Yeah, and I think that the point you made earlier, given the uncertainty that can arise as a result of Brexit, is that there's more of a premium on these skills.
It was happening anyway.
Sure.
But I think anytime you then introduce an extra layer of uncertainty into the economy, it puts a premium on those more effective selling skills. It's a bit Darwinian in a way. It's just accelerated the Darwinian process of, the forced evolution of salespeople to be progressively more effective at some of these more complex and challenging tasks.
So if a UK-based software entity or a US-based software entity with operations UK comes to you and says, Bob, hey, what should we be thinking about strategy-wise as a consequence of Brexit? What are the 2 or 3 things we should really be focusing on in the next year? How would you summarize that for them?
Let's break it down actually into 3 key components.
Sure.
Firstly, make sure that you have the right people on board. That, assess your current salespeople, and certainly whenever you make recruitment decisions, that you're bringing people in who contribute to the collective intelligence, the creativity of your organization. So hire smartly. 2, be really clear about which organizations and which problems you choose to target. Look for opportunities where, one, there is, or you believe you could create a compelling need for your prospect to do something, and where you're confident you can position your offering as having certain unique advantages to the customer. And thirdly, just execute well at every stage in the sales process. Work really hard to identify where the bottlenecks and the constraints are, the things that can slow down a sale, and focus actually both sales and marketing energy on unblocking those things that might hold back an otherwise promising sale.
Okay, so great summary. And so the last question for you, so just a personal question. So no, you're not a political prognosticator, but where do you think things are going to end up a year or 2 years down the road?
Well, I'll tell you where I hope they end up. I hope that reason prevails, and that the negotiations, I'm not going to pretend that this is the outcome I wanted, but it's a democratic decision. I hope that reason prevails, and our negotiations with our friends in Europe are conducted in a pragmatic, business-like way, rather than one that attempts to, prove a point of principle and punish. And I think with goodwill on both sides, we can accomplish that. And both the European Union and the UK can emerge stronger for it. It's not inevitable that they will.
Okay. Well, Bob Apollo, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
Remember, friends, make it a part of your day every day to do what you did today and deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And an easy way to do that is to make this podcast Accelerate a part of your daily routine. Listen in on your commute, in the gym, or maybe as part of your morning sales meeting. That way you won't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Tim Hughes, Régis Lemmens, and Bob Apollo. So thanks for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.